Anton Krieger here. This episode of All Things Green is brought to you by NextGen Clean Energy Solutions, your sustainability easy button from concept to completion. Welcome to All Things Green. I'm Anton, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. Elena Stachew is an engineer, biomimicry practitioner, and independent sustainability consultant, most notably working with Power a Clean Future Ohio, where she helps cities in Northeast Ohio reduce emissions through project planning, implementation, and policy innovation. Elena, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
It's a little bit warm up here, so our first order of business is to cool down with this beautiful Elderflower Cordial that I had brought today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I didn't forage these. I actually just harvested them from my parents' yard. We make it for my whole family, grandma and grandpa, my siblings. It's kind of a whole family affair, but it's a simple recipe, 5 ingredients. Mm-hmm. Do you want to hear about them?
Yes, I do.
Okay. It's elderflower, lemon, citric acid,
Okay.
A lot of sugar,
Yeah.
and water. So go ahead, give that a shot.
All right, thank you.
You can describe it to me. Elderflower is a native plant to Ohio.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, we should have cheersed.
Oh, cheers. We
Cheers
can do
now.
it. We should have cheersed. We did.
We did. That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're not just saying that because you're in it, right?
No. We were talking earlier, we're both amateur foragers, so
Yeah.
it's fun to try people's homemade creations.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well, you are a biomimicry PhD fellow.
I am.
Can you tell me and the viewers what biomimicry is?
Yeah, so biomimicry is a term that was coined by Jenine Benyus in her 1997 book, which is called Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature. So the title gives it a little bit away, but the easiest way to describe it is the conscious emulation of life's designs, principles, and systems. So it is really exciting to emulate nature because all around us, nature has adapted over 3.8 billion years of evolution to different conditions, different environments. But really the intent is to consciously do that, thinking about the impact of whatever your design or your product or your service would have, not only on other humans, but like ecosystems and species that coexist with us. And there's some element to biomimicry of reconnecting with nature. So there's this element of always going back outside, reconnecting with your home ecosystem or learning about new ecosystems. And there's even giving back in some way. So if your product degrades, could it provide nutrients to the soil to like build up, soil carbon or make soils more fertile? A way that's like giving back that isn't taking away, which we've done for so long, I think, like that extraction of the environment, but how can we give back or regenerate the environment? And even thinking about, say you had an inspiration from some tropical bird species, right?
Yeah.
For a design, could part of your profits go back to conserving the habitat of that animal? Or can that animal even serve on the patent of your design, right? Like, can you list that bird as an author of the patent because that's where you took the inspiration from? So it's really like reintegrating humans as part of the entire ecosystem and the entire planet, knowing we're only a part of it.
And is that a new practice? Is biomimicry something that's kind of modern, or has humans been doing this for a long time?
I would say the term, of course, itself is modern, but I would say humans have been doing it for a long time. I mean, we're part of nature. We're not separate from. So we've always, I think, learned from trees or birds or other species. A common example we learn in school is Leonardo da Vinci, actually, which...
the artist.
Yes, because in his sketchbooks, he actually spent a lot of time sketching different bird wings and feathers and was piloting like early flight systems in his design notebooks. So that is an early like example of biomimicry. So I definitely think those in the like creation, artistic space have always looked to nature for inspiration in different ways.
So, Elena, tell me a little bit about your dissertation on biohabitats.
Yeah, so the program through the University of Akron, all of the biomimicry PhD fellows work part-time with companies and different organizations to infuse biomimicry into their practices. So I worked with Biohabitats, which is an ecological restoration, engineering, and design firm. They're all over the country, but they have an office here in Cleveland. And I would really say that I almost learned just as much, if not more, from them than they did with me, because ecological restoration in and of itself is mimicking ecosystems. You're restoring and rehabilitating damaged ecosystems back to a state of, functioning for different species and organisms. So in a sense, it's a practice of biomimicry. They often said they practiced eco-mimicry. So that was their term. So my dissertation co-evolved with them, particularly looking at the Great Lakes and Lake Erie and coastal ecosystem restoration. So across Lake Erie, 80% of the coastline's covered with either concrete, rock, or steel.
That's a lot of impervious surface.
Yeah, a lot of man-made surfaces. Yeah, and so if you think naturally what a coastline might look like, there's beaches, there's marshes, there's wetlands, there's river deltas, and globally, coastal ecosystems are some of the most biodiverse places on the planet because they often serve as habitat refugia or nursery habitat for birds, amphibians, frogs, fish. So by kind of disrupting that land-water interface with either a concrete wall or a steel wall or piles of rock, really eliminates a lot of potential habitat. So I looked to first mangroves. If you think about just these trees with their roots kind of exposed, they are known for stabilizing sediment and actually building soil around them. So in a way, preventing erosion, but they have mangrove ecosystems are full of diverse habitat. So the idea was, okay, we don't have mangroves in Ohio,
right? Yeah.
But what do we have that's like that? And so coastal wetlands, marshes, trees known as riparian trees. So they're trees that live along stream banks, floodplains, riverbanks, the coast. So they're used to unstable slopes or sloped, surfaces and periodic flooding from water. And so I've been the last few years making 3D models of different tree species to serve as prototypes for kind of recreating that woody ecosystem along the lake that would still provide erosion and storm surge protection for human infrastructure. And you could build it with different materials. Ideally getting away from concrete, rock, and steel. That would be the whole point. But also it serving as a habitat template for a bunch of different organisms. Being more multifunctional than just a static surface.
Yeah, so these 3D models, they would catch maybe debris and things like that.
Yeah.
That would kind of create more land, create a buffer between human infrastructure and the lake.
Yeah.
And it would also maybe catch food and be a home for fish and birds and things like that.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and I think another way to look at it, too, is a lot of our infrastructure is heavy and permanent. So once you put something out there, it stays there for decades. And we try to keep it there as long as possible because it's really expensive and difficult to remove or retrofit or repair. There's a lot of failing bulkheads. So those are those steel walls along the Cuyahoga River because they're falling in because the land is pushing it. They're bowing out. But it would be nice if we could think of infrastructure as temporary. So especially in areas where maybe you're trying to say, to your point, building sediment or building soil. Maybe we're trying to make the lake bottom shallower and not as deep. So then your waves aren't as high. They don't come up to shore quite as high as they used to. Can that infrastructure dissolve over time in a friendly way to the environment? So that could be a biopolymer, so that could degrade naturally into, say, water or carboxylic acid. If it was combined with something like cellulose or lignin, which are elements of wood, can it be almost like as it's degrading, it serves as like food for macroinvertebrates or microorganisms, right? So it's rethinking just, does infrastructure need to be permanent? What other functions can it have besides that, like, you know, erosion stability piece? It's just rethinking the whole process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ideally, these plastics made out of biodegradable material wouldn't cause an issue with microplastics.
Yeah, that would be the goal. I think what's challenging is most polymers, if they're exposed to UV, that's what causes that micro nanoplastic issue. They break down in a not natural way. Mm-hmm. So I think if you were designing these systems and say it's like a tree root structure, right? And parts of it were above the water, exposed to that UV light from the sun, maybe those pieces don't have polymer at all. It's just like fully wood, or it's fully something very natural, right? And then underneath, if it's, say, fully submerged in water, sort of below where light might be penetrating through the water column, and it's not going to be exposed to UV, then that can be the polymer piece that like slowly degrades in the water over time. So I think if you even think about just where material goes in one system, it's like different materials in different spots depending on what it's going to be exposed to. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And to utilize these models, you also have a vehicle where you're working with cities and other people. You work with Power a Clean Future Ohio to implement policies that are good for the environment.
Yeah. So while I'm trying to finish my PhD, I'm working as a sustainability consultant, as you mentioned. So one of those organizations is Power a Clean Future Ohio. Been around since February of 2020. So you can imagine that was an interesting time to launch a new nonprofit.
Just a month before the pandemic.
Right. And I joined in February of 2022 with the intent of really broadening membership in Northeast Ohio. So it's a statewide, nonpartisan nonprofit where we work with cities large and small across the state. We have 51 member communities, and it's fully grant funded. So that means cities don't pay for our services, and we offer technical resources, like we'll do research memos, we provide policy templates, ordinance templates. Say they're doing a refreshing of their building code, or how, say, someone might go through an approval process to get rooftop solar, and there's an easier way for a resident to go through that process, like it could be more streamlined, more efficient. Mm-hmm. We can offer ways for a city to streamline that process. And so I really think of PCFO as kind of a technical capacity staff extension role of cities. Like we're in the background really working with city staff and city champions and working with them where they are, training them, offering, ways for them to learn new skills as needed that really incorporate sustainability and environmental impacts in every project a city does, while also keeping in mind that while you're trying to do projects that say combat climate change or reduce emissions or adapt to the effects that we're seeing, that it should also benefit people. So that could be reducing energy bill costs, could be increasing local air quality, increasing public health, because all of that's related. So there's a lot of overlap and intersection with that work of like a variety of different fields.
Yeah. So you're helping governments with research projects and things like that, but also maybe advising policy and resolutions. Could you tell me a little bit more about resolutions?
Yeah. So when cities join, they do have to pass a city council resolution, and we provide a template for that. And that is really just solidifying their commitment to thinking about climate change and maybe different policy areas the city's identified. So that could be maybe they're really interested in building an electric vehicle charging network, or like getting more of the residents interested in electric vehicles and having chargers at home, or increasing rooftop solar, both for residents or renters or small businesses. It could be land use policy changes. Like if a city has a lot of vacant land, how could you repurpose that in different ways that both benefit people and the environment? So it really depends on what the city wants to do. And some cities want to start with, say, like a climate action plan. Like the city of Cleveland's been working on an update of their climate action plan. Some cities have never done one. So it's like advising them on like, where do they start? Not all cities can afford or have the time to do like an expansive process, but what is something that's reasonable for them to really look at what they can do as a city and how they work with their residents and the business community in reducing, environmental impact.
Yeah, and it can be complicated working with all those stakeholders.
Yes, because everyone has different needs and priorities. Yeah, so we're really it's an interesting spot to be in, but we're really in the middle, kind of a facilitator and a mediator between all these different spaces, which I find interesting because back to biomimicry, we're kind of like translators between the natural world and the biological world into, say, design or engineering or business. And so it feels like that facilitator, translator, mediator role just like follows me regardless of where I go. But I really like it because you're at the intersection of a lot of different fields. And that's, I think, where a lot of innovation or systemic change can take place that really like impacts people's lives in a positive way.
Yeah. So in addition to being a mediator in these conversations, how much do you see yourself as an educator of maybe some of these best management practices that cities can implement?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of education, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's where there are a lot of tax credits and rebates available now for a homeowner to take advantage of. Or if you're buying a new vehicle, you can get like an electric vehicle credit for either a new or a used car. I think there's also a credit available for a hybrid vehicle. And there's all these different tax credits you can take advantage of depending on what kind of project you're pursuing. And it's a really complicated process to navigate because we've never had this before. Like this, both with the IRA and the Building Infrastructure Law or the bill, it's the most amount of money we've seen for the environment and climate in the U.S. is history. And I think globally, it's like the most amount of money any country has ever dedicated, which is really exciting, but it's also like really challenging for cities to, it's kind of drinking from a fire hose a bit. There's just a lot going on right now. So trying to distill what's important to tackle now versus what relationships should you start building so that in a few years down the road, you're ready to tackle this project or that project, right? Yeah, and a lot of it too would also be education on federal grants. So interestingly, a lot of federal grants are coming out of departments that typically didn't do community-based environment grants. The DOE is a perfect example, the Department of Energy. They've always funded research through either labs, academic institutions. They've done some defense work. They've never really worked directly with the community. So interestingly, the Department of Energy is also having to learn how to navigate the space while they're giving out grants. So what's really interesting is having this two-way process as PCFO that we can go back to DOE, providing like feedback of like how this process could go better, how it could be easier for cities to apply. At the same time, while maybe a small village in Northeast Ohio or like a smaller city would have never applied for a Department of Energy grant before because why would they have needed to, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of education, I think, in different scales and different spaces with all of this work. Yeah.
With an unprecedented amount of money.
Yes, that everyone wants.
Yeah. There's clearly some learning that local governments could do, the federal government could do.
Yeah, state governments could do,
And that's a lot to navigate as a consultant.
Yeah.
And you're doing the hard work of making sure that both sides are learning, it seems like.
Yeah, and like the way I think about it is, I mean, I'm one person, right? And Power Clean Future Ohio, or PCFO, is one organization of many that are either nonprofits or community leaders or partners or utilities or private companies, other consultants that are all wanting to take advantage of this federal money and also wanting to implement really interesting projects like community solar projects or composting projects. And so if we go back to trees, I like this analogy. It's like if you think about the mycorrhizal network, so that's the fungal network under that communicates with tree root systems. So they talk about the wood wide web. Wood wide web? Is that right?
I don't know.
I think that's right.
WWW.
Yeah, it's like the World Wide Web, but it's the Wood Wide Web.
That's
the term that's been coined on how like trees communicate with each other through their root systems, through chemical signaling, but also through the fungal system, mycorrhizal network.
Yeah.
So I like to think that all these different organizations are part of that like mycorrhizal network, and then the trees that emerge or pop up would be the different projects that are implemented. So like if you think about growing the forest of Ohio, you're growing the forest of Ohio both with increasing actual tree canopy, but having more community solar or having more micro-mobility options for people to, say, navigate not just by a car, but by bus or by scooter or by bike, you know. So, yeah, it's like a fun way to think about it.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
Taking a monumental government financial system and breaking it into a nature.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah, and it's like it makes you realize you shouldn't be alone and you shouldn't have to tackle everything yourself. And a lot of nonprofits suffer from mission creep. Yeah. Understandably so, because they're mission-driven organizations that want to impact communities positively. And so if they get asked to do different things, they want to be able to say yes to it all. They want to be able to tackle it all. But if we really start to understand, like, what can my organization do really well and really efficiently, and what can this organization over here do really well and really efficiently, and just start to communicate and pass along information to each other more, then A, you're not getting exhausted and like suffering burnout and feeling like you're taking on too much.
Right.
But you're also relying on other people and learning from other people and letting them shine in moments where it makes sense for them to, because they're really good at that type of work. And in other moments, your organization might shine. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Creating that network so that everybody can be, you know, steering the aircraft carrier in the right direction, and you're not just trying to push it all yourself, because it won't go anywhere.
Competitive, right? It's like a mutualism way of thinking about it.
Well, that can be tough too in nonprofit, right? Because if we're all applying for the same grants, it can get a little tough sometimes.
It is, yeah. But I know that what the federal government is really trying to push, and now state governments, because they've received some federal funds and are deploying new state level programs cities can apply for, nonprofits, is they really want to see more partnerships. So they want to see a couple nonprofits going after money together. So it's, again, that cooperative process and not that competitive process. And we even try to do that at PCFO. So when we're hearing about other communities doing similar projects, if they're in a close enough regional proximity, they might want to pair together and like collaborate and combine efforts. And even if they're not, say it's like Northern Ohio to Southern Ohio, like maybe they should learn from each other. Like there could be a lot of obstacles they're both facing that they could share resources. So it's like really trying to move away. I mean, we're all trying to improve quality of life on a warming planet. So it shouldn't be competitive. It should be cooperative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the nonprofit that we're starting actually covers the amphibians walking across roads to vernal pools.
Yeah, we're going to start it, right? Okay, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, and we got to find the grant funding for it too.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about this fun idea that you have really quickly about amphibians in the area.
Yeah, so I was thinking about legislation that wasn't so human-centric, but it was like other species-centric, like thinking about the rights of nature and other organisms that like coexist on this planet with us. I learned from a friend that works at the Cuyahoga Valley National Park that they did a study when in the early to late spring, when you have those rainy nights and it's starting to get in like the 50s.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some cooler frost, but it's starting to warm up. That's when the amphibians emerge from hibernation. So these are like salamanders and toads and frogs. Mm-hmm. And they look for those vernal pools, which are spring like depressions of just water, and that's where they lay their eggs.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're crossing roads to get across from like one part of the park to the other. And they did a study that said if they had closed all the roads in the national park where they're aware of amphibian migration taking place, they could reduce mortality by 50%.
That means we could have double the toads.
I know, and super cool like salamanders that are only native to Ohio. Like we have a really unique endemic species only native to this state. And so there's been a part of me that's like, it'd be really cool to do a legislation effort, because you'd have to work with every jurisdiction that
Right.
crosses through that park.
Yeah.
So it'd be like Rocky River Reservation, Brecksville, Cuyahoga Valley, anywhere that we know amphibian migration is taking place. So it might be like a dozen communities
Right.
that have to pass this salamander migration or amphibian migration, like road closure legislation, which would mean people would have maybe a longer commute or couldn't drive through the parks, certain time. But it's only a couple weeks out of the year.
Right.
And then I don't think everyone knows about this, like that it's such a unique feature of like having a glacial history like we do in northern Ohio, that you can go out to the parks at night and like help them cross the road or watch them cross the road. It's very cool.
It's
done
really
it a couple
cool.
times. Yeah.
Yeah. And after watching this episode, I think all of these jurisdictions will probably pass legislation
So
to...
we won't need to start a nonprofit. It'll be done already.
Well, Elena, we are running thin on time. I hope we can have you back on to discuss even more things like Citadel Impact Consulting that we didn't get into. But is there anybody you'd like to plug, any books you'd like to plug before we wrap up here?
Yeah. So this is An Immense World by Ed Yong. So it is how animal senses reveal the hidden realms around us. So this was a book I received. I'm part of the Biomimicry Institute's Launchpad Accelerator for the root-inspired infrastructure work I told you about before. So they gave us a bunch of books. I was in Western Montana a few weeks ago. And this book is amazing because it goes through the 5 senses that we as humans experience, but there's also chapters on what would it be like to sense magnetic fields or like chemical signaling or even just like vibrations, right? So like snakes feel vibrations through their body, and just really trying to understand what it would be like to view the world through the body of another organism, like having compound eyes like insects do.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So I recommend it to anybody that is just curious how other species view the world, because every time I read the book, I'm just blown away.
Well, we will include that in the show notes.
Yeah.
But Elena, thank you so much for talking all things green with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks again.
I'm going to let our viewers know how they can stay in touch with us.
Sounds good.
If you'd like to stay connected with the show, be sure to follow us on TikTok at ATG Show. And if you'd like to rewatch full episodes, check out our YouTube channel, All Things Green Show. You can find all of our sources from today's episode in our show notes. All Things Green will be back very soon. Thank you so much for being a part of the global sustainability movement.